Liam's heart plummeted. His stomach, already aching with hunger, twisted into a knot of pure panic. He had offended her. The gift was too strange, too personal, too cheap. "I'm sorry," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "I shouldn't have. It's all I had." His apology hung in the air, swallowed by the restaurant's quiet hum. Across the table, his blind date, Evie, said nothing. A single, silent tear traced a path down her cheek. Her composure, so perfect just a moment ago, had completely shattered. Her trembling fingers hovered over the small, hand-carved sparrow he had placed on the polished mahogany, the candlelight making the wood gleam like a confession. Her eyes, wide and shimmering, finally lifted to meet his. Her voice was a choked whisper, filled with an emotion he couldn't possibly understand. "This sparrow," she began, her breath catching. "Who told you to make this?" Just 6 hours earlier, the only thing on Liam's mind had been the rapidly thinning stack of job rejection emails on his phone. He sat at the wobbly kitchen table in their tiny apartment, the scent of burnt toast still lingering in the air from a breakfast that felt like a lifetime ago. Across from him, his 7-year-old daughter Chloe was meticulously coloring in a picture of a dragon, her tongue sticking out in concentration. Her dark hair was pulled into a lopsided ponytail, a testament to his fumbling attempts to be both a father and a mother. "Daddy," she said, not looking up from her masterpiece. "Are you sad?" Liam forced a smile, the muscles in his face feeling stiff and unfamiliar. "No, sweet pea." "Just thinking about a job?" He nodded, running a hand through his tired hair. "Yeah, about a job for 7 years, ever since his wife, Anna, had slipped away from them in a sterile hospital room, leaving him with a tiny, wailing baby and a heart full of holes. His life had been a series of tactical retreats. He'd sold his woodworking tools, the ones that felt like extensions of his own hands. He'd abandoned his small workshop, the place where the scent of cedar and sawdust had been his sanctuary. He'd taken jobs in warehouses, on construction sites, in kitchens, anything that paid the bills and allowed him to be home to tuck Chloe into bed. But the last job, a temporary gig stocking shelves, had ended a month ago. Now their savings were gone. All that was left was a crumpled $10 bill and a handful of change in a jar on the counter. Chloe set down her crayon and slid off her chair, her small hand finding his. "I have an idea," she said, her expression serious. "Oh yeah?" he asked, trying to match her tone. "You need a friend," she declared. "A grown-up friend. So you won't be so thinky all the time." Before he could respond, she grabbed his phone from the table where he'd left it. Her small fingers moved across the screen with a speed that always amazed him. He was about to tell her to be careful when she turned the phone back to him, a triumphant grin on her face. On the screen was a dating profile, a woman named Evie. Her smile was warm and genuine, and her bio was short and simple. Loves long walks, old books, and the beauty of simple, handmade things. And below it, a message Chloe had already sent. "My name is Liam. I'd love to meet you tonight." Liam's blood ran cold. "Chloe, no." "What did you do?" "I made you a date," she announced proudly. "She likes handmade things, Daddy." "Like your birds." A response notification pinged. It was from Evie. "I'd like that too. How about the Gilded Lantern at 7? Panic clawed at his throat. The Gilded Lantern was one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. He couldn't afford the valet parking, let alone a glass of water. "Sweet pea, you can't just do things like this," he said, his voice strained. I can't go." Chloe's triumphant smile crumbled. Her lower lip began to tremble. "But I thought it would make you happy." The sight of her crestfallen face broke him. He had spent 7 years protecting her from the harsh realities of their life, from the constant worry that gnawed at him in the dead of night. He couldn't let her see that this simple, innocent act had just pushed him closer to the edge of a cliff. He took a deep breath, forcing the panic down. He would turn this into a lesson about kindness. "You know what, Chloe?" he said, scooping her into his arms. "You're right. It's always a good time to be kind to someone. Let's go make a new friend for your dad." Her face lit up, and he knew he was trapped. He would go. He would meet this woman, politely explain that there had been a misunderstanding, and leave. But he couldn't show up empty-handed. Not after her profile had mentioned a love for handmade things. That felt like a test, a sign from a universe he no longer believed in. He looked at the $10 bill on the counter. It was their grocery money for the next 2 days. His stomach clenched, but his decision was made. "Okay, Dragon Tamer," he said, setting her down. "Daddy has an important mission." The mission took him 3 miles across town, on foot, to a small, dusty craft store tucked away on a side street. The walk saved him the bus fare, but his worn-out sneakers did little to cushion his feet against the hard pavement. He ignored the gnawing hunger and focused on the task. Inside the store, he spent 20 minutes examining blocks of wood, his calloused fingers testing the grain, the weight, the density. He finally chose a small, perfect block of basswood. It was smooth and pale, ideal for detailed work. That was $7. The remaining 3 went to a tiny bottle of tung oil, a natural finish that would bring out the wood's inner warmth. Back in the apartment, with Chloe watching in fascinated silence, he sat at the kitchen table and began to carve. For the first time in years, the world outside his small bubble of concentration disappeared. The overdue bills, the empty pantry, the fear of the future. It all melted away. There was only the wood, the blade, and the image in his mind. He carved a sparrow. It was a bird of resilience, a creature that could find joy in the smallest things. He remembered carving one for Anna on their first anniversary. He poured all of his skill, his memory, and his desperate hope into the tiny figure. He shaped each feather with meticulous care, sanded the body until it was as smooth as a river stone, and finally applied the oil, rubbing it into the grain until the wood seemed to glow from within. It was perfect. It was a piece of his soul, valued at exactly $10. Now, sitting in the opulent restaurant, the warmth of the candlelight unable to chase away the chill of his mistake, he felt the full weight of his foolishness. The woman across from him, Evie, wasn't looking at the craftsmanship. She was looking at something else entirely, something that made her weep. Her question hung between them, heavy and strange. "Who told you to make this?" Liam could only stare back, his mind a blank slate of confusion and regret. He had no answer. He had followed his daughter's lead, followed his own foolish heart, and in doing so, had stumbled into a mystery he couldn't begin to comprehend. Liam stared at her, the question echoing in the space between them. "Who told you to make this?" Her tone wasn't accusatory, but it was intense, searching, as if his answer held some impossible weight. He fumbled for words, his mind racing to find a logical explanation where there was none. "No one," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "No one told me anything. My daughter. She set this up." As a surprise, he gestured vaguely at his phone in his pocket. "She saw on your profile that you liked handmade things. The sparrow. I don't know. It just felt right. It's a bird of hope, isn't it?" He trailed off, feeling foolish. He sounded like a man grasping at straws, trying to explain an instinct he didn't understand himself. Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. She took a slow, deliberate breath, as if steadying herself. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, laced with a melancholy that seemed to rise from a place of deep memory. "My mother," she said, her eyes fixed on the wooden bird. "She passed away when I was 10. She wasn't a woman of means. We didn't have much, but she had this belief in small miracles. She used to tell me that sparrows were the world's quiet little heroes, overlooked, common, but resilient. They worked hard, they protected their family, and they never stopped singing." She finally picked up the carving, her touch so gentle it was almost a caress. She turned it over and over in her palm, her thumb stroking the smooth wood. The day before she went into the hospital for the last time, She gave me a tiny silver locket. Inside, there wasn't a picture. There was a carving of a sparrow. She told me, "As long as you remember to look for the sparrows, Evie, you'll never truly be lost." The name Evie hit Liam with a jolt. It was her. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity. This was his date, and he had just, through some cosmic, unbelievable coincidence, handed her a perfect replica of her most cherished memory. The entire situation felt surreal, as if he had walked through a door into someone else's life. He felt a sudden, urgent need to leave. This was too intimate, too raw. He was an intruder in her grief. He started to push his chair back. "I should go. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." "No," she said, her voice firm, cutting him off. Her eyes met his again, and the vulnerable, grieving woman was replaced by someone with a quiet, unshakable authority. "Please, don't go." She gestured for him to sit, and he found himself obeying without a second thought. The air had changed. The awkward tension of a blind date had evaporated, replaced by a strange, profound stillness. They were no longer a mismatched pair in a fancy restaurant. They were two people who had just accidentally shown each other their deepest scars. A waiter appeared at their table, pen poised over his notepad. "Are you ready to order?" Liam's panic returned in a cold wave. He opened his mouth to make an excuse, but Evelyn spoke first, her voice smooth and confident. "We'll need a few more minutes, thank you," she said, dismissing the waiter with a polite nod. She then turned her full attention back to Liam. "You haven't ordered anything to eat." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Liam's pride warred with his reality. He could lie, but something about the raw honesty of the last few minutes made that feel impossible. He swallowed, his throat dry. "I wasn't planning on eating," he admitted, the words tasting like ash. "I just came to give you the gift and say hello." He didn't need to say more. She understood. He saw it in the way her expression softened, not with pity, but with a sudden, startling clarity. She saw his worn collar, the faint frayed edge of his cuff. She saw the truth he had been trying so hard to hide. For a long moment, she was silent. Liam braced himself for the inevitable polite dismissal. Instead, she leaned forward, a determined look in her eyes. "Well, I can't possibly eat alone now," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "And you can't leave until you tell me about the daughter who commandeers your phone to play matchmaker. Please, Liam, let me thank you properly for this." She held up the sparrow. "You have no idea what this means to me." She signaled the waiter again. "We'll have 2 of the chef's specials," she said, handing the menus back without a glance. Liam could only nod, a wave of gratitude so powerful it almost choked him, washing over him. It wasn't charity. The way she did it, it was a shared experience, a pact. He felt seen, not for his poverty, but for his kindness. As they waited for the food, they talked. He told her about Chloe, about her fierce spirit and her lopsided ponytails, about her love for dragons. His voice was filled with a warmth and pride that lit up his tired features. She listened intently, her chin resting on her hand, a small, genuine smile playing on her lips. In turn, she spoke not of her work or her life now, but of her mother. She shared small, precious memories of a woman who loved to bake and who believed that kindness was a currency that never lost its value. When the food arrived, Liam ate with a hunger that was about more than just an empty stomach. It was as if he'd been starving for a moment of simple, human connection. The conversation flowed easily, a quiet river of shared understanding about loss, about parenthood, about the struggle to keep hope alive in a world that often felt determined to crush it. By the time they were finished, the restaurant was beginning to empty. The candlelight cast long shadows on the walls. Liam felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. As they stood to leave near the restaurant's grand entrance, he turned to her, the words of gratitude feeling clumsy and inadequate. "Evie, I thank you for everything." "No, thank you, Liam," she said, clutching the small sparrow in her hand. "You gave me back a memory I thought was faded for good." He nodded, ready to say goodnight and walk back into his own world, back to his reality of job hunting and worrying about rent. He took a step toward the door, but her voice stopped him. "Liam, wait." He turned back. She was studying him with that same intense, searching gaze from the beginning of the night. "You're looking for a job, you said." He nodded cautiously. "I am. I'll find something. I always do." "Integrity is hard to find," she said, more to herself than to him. "Honesty, too." She met his eyes, and a decision seemed to click into place behind hers. "My company, we're always looking for good people. People with character. It's an entry-level position in one of our warehouses, nothing glamorous. But it's steady work. Good pay. Benefits." She paused, her expression unreadable. "Would you be open to an opportunity like that?" Liam stared at her, then at the towering glass building behind her, its lobby glowing like a palace. An opportunity. The word sounded foreign, like a language he had forgotten how to speak. For years, his life had been about necessities, not opportunities. "A job?" he repeated, the word feeling thick in his mouth. "Why?" "You don't know me." A faint smile touched her lips. "I know you're a man who walks 3 miles to spend his last $10 on a gesture of kindness for a stranger. That tells me more than any resume ever could." She reached into her clutch and pulled out a simple, elegant business card. The paper was heavy, the lettering crisp and embossed. Evelyn Reed, Special Projects Division, Reed Industries. The name meant nothing to him, but the confidence with which she handed it to him was absolute. "This is me," she said. "Call the number on Monday morning. Ask for HR. They'll be expecting you." He took the card, his rough fingers tracing the raised letters. It felt like a ticket to another world. He was so overwhelmed he almost forgot the small wooden bird still cradled in her hand. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it," she replied, her eyes warm. "And say you'll have a safe walk home." With a final, small nod, she turned and disappeared into a black town car that had materialized at the curb as if summoned by magic. Liam stood on the sidewalk, the cold night air sharp contrast to the warmth that had filled the restaurant. He looked down at the business card, then in the direction her card vanished, his mind a whirlwind of disbelief and a fragile, terrifying flicker of hope. The walk home was a blur. The city lights seemed brighter, the streets less menacing. The weight of the world, which usually pressed down on his shoulders like a physical burden, felt fractionally lighter. When he quietly let himself into the apartment, he found Chloe asleep on the sofa, her coloring book open on her chest. He gently lifted her into his arms, her small body warm and trusting against his, and carried her to bed. As he tucked the blankets around her, he watched her sleep, her face peaceful in the soft glow of her nightlight. She was the reason for all of it. The struggle, the fear, and now, this impossible chance. He didn't tell her about the job offer the next morning. He couldn't, not until he knew it was real. He couldn't bear to build a hope in her that might be torn down. He simply told her that he'd met a very nice lady named Evie who had loved her father's carving. Chloe's delighted smile was all the reward he needed. On Monday morning, his heart hammered against his ribs as he dialed the number on the card. He expected a series of automated menus, of gatekeepers and dead ends. Instead, a polite, professional voice answered on the second ring. "Human Resources, how can I help you?" "Hello," he stammered, his palms sweating. "My name is Liam Mercer. I was told to call by an Evelyn Reed." There was a brief pause, the sound of typing, and then the voice returned, warm and efficient. "Ah, yes, Mr. Mercer. We've been expecting you. We have an opening for you in our logistics department. The warehouse supervisor would like to meet with you this afternoon. Would 2 o'clock work?" Just like that, it was real. Reed Industries headquarters was not just a building. It was a monument. A gleaming tower of black steel and glass that pierced the clouds. It made him feel small and insignificant. He clutched the strap of his worn messenger bag, straightened his clean but faded shirt, and walked through the revolving doors into a lobby so vast and silent it felt like a cathedral built to worship money. The interview was a blur of efficiency. The warehouse supervisor, a stern but fair-looking man named Frank, asked him a few straightforward questions, looked over the sparse application Liam filled out, and nodded. "Evelyn Reed recommended you personally," Frank said, his eyes appraising Liam. "That doesn't happen. Ever. Around here, a recommendation like that is as good as gold." He extended a hand. "You start tomorrow, 6 a.m. sharp. Don't be late." Liam walked out of the tower feeling dizzy, the city streets seeming to tilt beneath his feet. He had a job. A real, steady job with benefits. The relief was so profound, so all-encompassing, that he had to stop and lean against a wall just to catch his breath. The first few days were a whirlwind of hard, physical work. The warehouse was enormous, a city of shelves stacked high with boxes, the air filled with the hum of forklifts and the beep of scanners. It was exhausting, back-breaking labor, but Liam threw himself into it with a fierce, desperate gratitude. He was the first to arrive, the last to leave. He learned the inventory system in a single day, his movements quick and efficient, his focus absolute. Frank, his supervisor, watched him with grudging approval. On Friday afternoon, as Liam was loading a pallet, a sudden hush fell over the normally noisy section of the warehouse. The other workers subtly straightened up, their chatter dying down. A man in a perfectly tailored $1,000 suit was walking down the concrete aisle, his polished Italian shoes looking absurdly out of place. He moved with the predatory grace of a shark, his eyes cold and assessing. He stopped directly in front of Liam. "You're Mercer," the man stated, his voice a low, condescending drawl. Liam wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead with the back of his sleeve. "Yes, sir." The man's eyes flickered over Liam's work clothes, a faint smirk touching his lips. "I'm Damian Prescott, Chief Operating Officer." He let the title hang in the air. "I hear you're a friend of Evelyn Reed's." Interesting. Liam's stomach tightened. He didn't know how to respond. Prescott took a step closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was more of a threat. "I make it my business to know everything that happens in this company. Every hire, every contract, every new acquaintance." His gaze was sharp, menacing. "Just remember who signs the paychecks, Mercer. We have very high standards here. It would be a shame if you couldn't meet them." Without waiting for a reply, Damian Prescott turned on his heel and walked away, the sound of his expensive shoes echoing on the concrete. The noise of the warehouse slowly returned to its normal level, but for Liam, the air had grown cold. He had a job. He had a chance. And in the space of 30 seconds, he had just realized he also had a powerful and dangerous enemy. The chill from Damian Prescott's threat lingered long after he was gone. Liam finished his shift in a haze of anxiety, the rhythmic thud of boxes on the pallet doing little to quiet the racing of his mind. He tried to rationalize it. Powerful men were arrogant. It was probably just a warning, a way of establishing dominance. He was a warehouse worker, a ghost in the machine. Why would a man like Prescott waste a second thought on him? But he couldn't shake the feeling that he had been marked, that the quiet corner of the world he was trying to build for himself and Chloe had just been trespassed upon by something dangerous. He pushed the thought aside. He had a job. He had a paycheck coming. That was all that mattered. Complaining or showing fear would get him nowhere. He would keep his head down, work harder than anyone else, and make himself invisible. That night, after tucking Chloe into bed, he sat at his kitchen table and pulled out the business card Evelyn had given him. He typed out a simple text message, his thumb hovering over the send button for a full minute before he finally pressed it. "Hi, Evie, it's Liam Mercer. I just wanted to say thank you again for the opportunity. I started this week, and I'm incredibly grateful." He hadn't expected a reply, at least not right away. He imagined her life was a whirlwind of important meetings and black tie events. But his phone buzzed less than a minute later. "I'm so glad to hear that, Liam. I knew you'd be a great fit. How about we celebrate with a proper cup of coffee this weekend? My treat. Saturday, 10 a.m., the Daily Grind on Chestnut Street. The Daily Grind was a small, bustling coffee shop in his neighborhood, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and local art on the walls. It was a world away from the gilded lantern. It was her way of telling him that she could meet him in his world. His heart gave a nervous flutter. This was different. This wasn't a blind date or a job offer. This was something else. "I'd like that," he typed back. "I'll have my daughter with me, if that's okay." The reply was instantaneous. "I was hoping you would." When Saturday morning arrived, Liam found himself more nervous than he had been for the date. He dressed Chloe in her favorite yellow dress, the one she called her sunshine dress, and managed to get her pigtails almost even. He wore his best jeans and a simple gray sweater, hoping he looked presentable. They found Evelyn at a small table near the window, a book open in front of her. She wasn't wearing a power suit or designer clothes, just a simple pair of jeans and a soft, cream-colored sweater that mirrored his own. When she looked up and smiled, the whole coffee shop seemed to get a little brighter. "Liam, good to see you," she said, her voice warm. Then she turned her gaze to the small girl standing shyly behind his legs. "And you must be Chloe. I've heard so much about you." Chloe peeked out, her eyes wide. "Are you Daddy's new friend?" Evelyn's smile widened. "I hope so. My name is Evie." She didn't offer a handshake. Instead, she pointed to the chair next to her. "I saved you a seat. I hear you're an expert on dragons." Chloe's shyness vanished, replaced by a delighted giggle. She immediately scrambled into the chair and began an enthusiastic, detailed explanation of the differences between a Western dragon and a wyvern. Liam watched, mesmerized, as Evelyn listened with genuine fascination, asking thoughtful questions and treating Chloe's passionate lecture with the same respect she would a corporate presentation. After a few minutes, Evelyn reached into her bag. "I brought you something," she said to Chloe, pulling out a beautiful, leather-bound sketchbook and a professional set of colored pencils. "I thought a great artist deserved some great tools." Chloe gasped, her hands covering her mouth in awe. "For me?" she whispered. Liam's throat tightened. It was such a simple, thoughtful gift, a gesture that saw his daughter, and by extension him, with perfect clarity. As Chloe immediately set to work drawing a magnificent, rainbow-scaled beast, Liam and Evelyn talked. The conversation was easy, comfortable. They spoke of parenthood, of the funny, frustrating, and beautiful moments that made up their days. He felt a wall inside himself, one he hadn't even known was there, begin to crumble. For 2 hours, they were just 3 people sharing a sunny table in a neighborhood coffee shop. For 2 hours, Liam forgot about his empty bank account, his anxieties, and the cold warning he'd received in the warehouse. He simply felt happy. The feeling did not last. The following Tuesday, a rush order came down to the warehouse. It was a high-priority international shipment of proprietary electronics, valued at over $500,000. The paperwork was complex, the customs declarations meticulous. Frank, the supervisor, assigned the final inspection and sign-off to Liam. "You've got the best eye for detail I've seen in years, Mercer," Frank had said, clapping him on the shoulder. "I'm trusting you with this." The praise filled Liam with a quiet pride. He spent the next 3 hours cross-referencing every item number, checking every label against the master manifest, and ensuring every crate was sealed and sorted for the correct transport. Everything matched perfectly. He signed his name on the final line with a steady hand and watched as the truck was loaded and driven away. The call came the next morning. Frank summoned him to his small, glass-walled office. The supervisor's face was pale, his expression grim. "Close the door," he said, his voice tight. Liam's stomach dropped. Frank threw a file down on the desk. "The Zurich shipment. It arrived this morning. It was sent to our facility in Singapore." Liam stared at him, confused. "What? That's impossible. I checked the destination codes myself. They were all routed for Zurich." "Well, the crates are sitting in a warehouse halfway across the world," Frank snapped, his voice rising with stress. "The manifest you signed off on was for Singapore. The client is threatening a lawsuit. The delay is going to cost this company tens of thousands of dollars a day. What the hell happened, Mercer? I don't know, Liam stammered, his mind reeling. He knew what he had read. He knew what he had checked. The paperwork had said Zurich. The manifest I had was correct. It must have been switched, or the data was wrong in the system. Frank's face hardened. Or the new guy who's been here a week got overwhelmed and made a catastrophic mistake. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I vouched for you, Mercer. I told them you were reliable. You've made me look like a fool. Frank, I swear to you, I did not make a mistake, Liam pleaded, desperation creeping into his voice. I can't hear it, Frank said, shaking his head. The evidence is right there, with your signature on the bottom. I've got executives breathing down my neck. I don't have a choice. He looked at Liam, his expression a mixture of anger and regret. You're fired. Clean out your locker. I want you off the premises in 30 minutes. The words, "you're fired," echoed in the small office, sucking all the air from Liam's lungs. For a moment, he couldn't move, couldn't think. He could only stare at Frank, this man who had trusted him, whose face was now a mask of grim finality. Frank, please, Liam said, his voice cracking. Just look at the security footage. Look at the logs. You'll see I did everything by the book. I can't, Liam. Frank cut in, his voice weary. The manifest you signed is the only evidence that matters. My superiors want a head on a platter for this, and yours is the only one on offer. It's out of my hands. As Liam stumbled out of the office, his legs feeling like lead, he saw him, Damien Prescott. He was standing at the far end of the main corridor, speaking to another executive, but his eyes were locked on Liam. A slow, triumphant smirk spread across his face. It was almost imperceptible, a tiny shift in the corner of his mouth, but to Liam, it was as loud as a confession. He knew with a sickening certainty that this was Prescott's doing. The altered manifest, the impossible mistake, the perfect timing, it was all a calculated act of destruction. But how could he prove it? He was a janitor turned warehouse packer. Damien Prescott was the chief operating officer. It was his word against a god's. Numbly, he walked to his locker. The metallic clang of the door opening sounded like a gavel falling on his life. He pulled out the small bag containing his lunchbox and a photo of Chloe, his movements stiff and robotic. The other workers averted their eyes, whispering amongst themselves. He could feel their gazes on his back, a mixture of pity and suspicion. He was no longer one of them. He was a failure, a screw-up, cast out of the one safe harbor he had managed to find. The walk home was a journey through a nightmare. Every step on the pavement was a reminder of his powerlessness. He had been so close, a steady paycheck, benefits, a future for Chloe that didn't involve a constant grinding fear. And now, it was all gone, snatched away by a man he barely knew for reasons he couldn't fathom. When he got to his apartment, his first instinct was to call Evelyn, to tell her what had happened, to plead his case, to ask for her help. But a wave of shame, hot and fierce, washed over him. What would he say? The job you gave me. I was fired on my second week. He would sound incompetent, pathetic, a charity case running back for another handout. His pride, the one thing he had left, wouldn't allow it. He couldn't tell Chloe either. He couldn't bear to see the hope in her eyes extinguish. When she ran to the door to greet him, her face alight with questions about his day, he forced a smile and lied. It was great, sweet pea, he said, his voice sounding hollow to his own ears. In fact, I worked so hard they gave me a couple of days off as a reward. Chloe's eyes went wide. Really? So we can go to the park tomorrow? You bet, he said, the lie a bitter stone in his throat. He would protect her from this, even if it broke him. High above the city, in her minimalist office on the 81st floor, Evelyn Reed was reviewing quarterly projections when her assistant buzzed her on the intercom. Mr. Prescott is here to see you, Ms. Reed. He says it's urgent. Send him in, she said, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. Damien's sense of urgency rarely aligned with hers. He swept into the office, his expression a carefully constructed mask of concern. "Evelyn," he said, his tone grave, "I'm afraid I have some bad news." She leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepling. "Go on." "It's about that man you recommended for the warehouse. Liam Mercer." He paused for dramatic effect. "There was an incident. A major one. He misrouted a $500,000 shipment to the wrong continent. The financial hit is significant. We had to let him go." Evelyn's face remained impassive, but a cold knot formed in her stomach. She stared at Damien, noticing the faint, almost imperceptible glint of satisfaction in his eyes. "Frank in logistics handled the termination. By the book, of course," Damien continued, sliding a tablet across her desk. "The evidence is all there. Signed manifest, wrong destination code. It's an open and shut case of gross incompetence." She glanced at the file on the screen. The manifest was there. Liam's signature was at the bottom. The destination was clearly listed as Singapore. On the surface, it was damning, but it didn't feel right. Her mind went back to the man at the restaurant, the quiet dignity, the meticulous care with which he had carved the sparrow, the fierce, protective love in his eyes when he spoke of his daughter. Was that the same man who would make such a careless, catastrophic error? "What a pity," Damien said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "I know you saw something in him. It's a shame he couldn't live up to the opportunity." Her gaze sharpened, her suspicion hardening into a certainty. Damien's satisfaction was too pronounced, his narrative too neat. He wanted her to see Liam as a failed project, a piece of trash she had mistakenly tried to salvage, and that, more than anything, convinced her that something was deeply wrong. "Thank you for the update, Damien," she said, her voice cool and dismissive. "I will look into the matter personally." The flicker of surprise in his eyes was all the confirmation she needed. He had expected her to drop it, to accept his version of the truth. He had underestimated her. As soon as he left, Evelyn pulled up Liam's file. His cell phone number was listed under his emergency contacts. She hesitated for only a moment before typing out a message. She didn't know what had happened. Not really. But she knew the man she'd met, and she was not going to let him go down without a fight. Liam sat in the dark, the glow of his phone the only light in the silent apartment. Chloe was asleep in her room, blissfully unaware that their world had just crumbled again. He was scrolling through low-wage job listings, each one a small twist of the knife, when his phone buzzed. It was a message from Evie. "Liam, I just heard what happened at the warehouse. I am so sorry. Please, can we talk?" He stared at the words, his heart pounding a frantic, painful rhythm. She knew. Of course she knew. She was probably disappointed, embarrassed that her act of kindness had blown up in her face. His thumb hovered over the glowing screen. His pride, raw and wounded, urged him to ignore it, to delete the message and disappear from her life forever. But another part of him, a part that was drowning in a sea of desperation, knew that her name on his screen might be the only lifeline he had left. He stared at the screen, the 3 short sentences glowing in the darkness. "I am so sorry. Please, can we talk?" Each word was a pull, a tug of war inside him. His pride, a stubborn, wounded animal, told him to throw the phone against the wall. It whispered that he was a fool, a charity case she was now obligated to deal with. He had been given a chance and failed spectacularly. The best thing to do, the only dignified thing, was to vanish. But then he thought of Chloe, sleeping peacefully in the next room. He thought of her unquestioning faith in him, her belief that her daddy could fix anything. He thought of the lie he'd told her, a flimsy shield against a harsh reality that was closing in on them. His pride was a luxury. Her future was a necessity. With a trembling thumb, he typed a reply. He deleted it, typed another, and deleted that one too. Finally, he just wrote the truth, stripped of all pretense. "I don't know what to say. I didn't make that mistake, Evie, but I can't prove it. Her response came in seconds. "You don't have to prove it to me. Meet me tomorrow, 9 a.m. The bench by the duck pond in Westerly Park. Westerly Park." It was neutral ground, a place of quiet anonymity. He agreed. The next morning he walked Chloe to school, the lie about his day off feeling heavier than ever. Then he made his way to the park, his steps leaden with a mixture of dread and a sliver of hope he was afraid to acknowledge. He found her on the bench, wrapped in a simple trench coat, watching the ducks glide across the water. She looked like any other person seeking a moment of peace, not the architect of his brief salvation. He sat down, leaving a respectable distance between them. The silence stretched for a moment, filled only by the crisp autumn air and the distant sound of traffic. "Tell me everything," she said, her voice quiet, her gaze never leaving the water. "From the beginning. Don't leave anything out." And so he did. He told her about Damien Prescott's visit to the warehouse, the condescending tone, the veiled threat. He described the rush shipment, his meticulous process, and the absolute certainty he felt when he signed the manifest for Zurich. He recounted the shock and humiliation of being fired, and the triumphant smirk on Prescott's face. He laid it all out, the bare, impossible facts, his voice low and steady, devoid of self-pity. He ended his story with a helpless shrug. "It's my word against the COO of the company," he said, a bitter laugh catching in his throat. "There's no fight to be had." Evelyn was silent for a long time, her eyes still fixed on the pond. When she finally turned to face him, her expression was hard, her eyes like chips of ice. "You're wrong," she said, her voice devoid of its earlier warmth, replaced by a steely resolve. "There is a fight, and we are going to win it." Liam stared at her, confused by her use of the word "we." "Liam," she said, her voice softening slightly, "there's something you need to know. Damien and I, we have a history. We were engaged a long time ago." The confession hit him like a physical blow. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces began to slam into place. The instant animosity, the personal nature of the threat. It wasn't about a warehouse worker. It had never been about him. "He's brilliant," she continued, "but he's also possessive. He sees anything that is mine, or anyone I show favor to, as a threat to what he believes he is still owed. He didn't just see you as an employee, Liam. He saw you as a rival. He finally understood. He was a pawn in a game he didn't even know was being played. The knowledge didn't make him feel better. It made him feel even more powerless." "So what now?" he asked, the hope that had flickered inside him starting to die. "Even if it's true, how do we prove it?" "You don't," she said, a new, formidable energy radiating from her. "You let me." She stood up. The transformation from the kind, empathetic Evie to a woman of immense power was palpable. "I believe you, Liam. 100%. Which means Damien has lied to me, and he has used my company's resources to do it. That is a mistake he will regret." She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. "I need you to do 2 things for me. First, I need you to trust me. Second, I need you to go home, spend the day with Chloe, and not look for another job. Not yet. Can you do that?" He could only nod, speechless. "Good," she said, her call connecting. She turned away slightly, her voice dropping, but Liam could still hear the words, each one a blade of cold, precise steel. "Graves, I need you. Yes, right now. I want a full diagnostic on a logistics error. Zurich shipment, warehouse 12. I want every piece of digital communication associated with it. Server logs, access records, email archives from the last 72 hours. I want to know every user who accessed or altered that manifest. Yes, every single one. And run a quiet, deep background check on Damien Prescott. I want to know every call he's made, every meeting he's had, every dollar he's spent for the past week." "And Graves?" She paused. "Be invisible." She ended the call and turned back to Liam. The fierce CEO was gone, replaced once more by the compassionate woman he'd met. "He's the best," she said simply. "If there's a digital breadcrumb, he'll find it." She placed a reassuring hand on his arm, her touch sending a surprising jolt of warmth through him. "Go home, Liam. Be a dad. Let me handle this." That evening, Evelyn was in her penthouse office, the city lights spread out beneath her like a carpet of scattered diamonds, when her private line buzzed. It was Graves. "That was fast," she said, answering the call. "Sometimes the obvious is hidden in plain sight." The security chief's voice crackled through the speaker. The official digital manifest was altered. It was a sophisticated hack, routed through several proxies to make it look like a system glitch. "But you traced it," Evelyn stated, her knuckles white as she gripped her phone. "We did," Graves confirmed. "But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is what we found on the warehouse security cameras. According to the logs, the camera overlooking the loading bay was down for maintenance for exactly 12 minutes yesterday afternoon, right before the truck was loaded." "An electrical fault?" Evelyn asked, though she already knew the answer. "That's the official story," Graves said. "But I pulled the building's power grid records. There were no faults, no outages. Someone with high-level admin access manually shut that camera off, then turned it back on. Evelyn's blood ran cold. It was the beginning. A thread. "Who has that level of access, Graves?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "A handful of senior executives," he replied, "and one other person. The COO, Damian Prescott." A cold, calculated fury settled over Evelyn. It was one thing to suspect Damian's treachery. It was another to see the first piece of hard evidence. The manually disabled camera was not a smoking gun, but it was a clear and deliberate footprint. Damian had been there, digitally at least, covering his tracks. "He had an accomplice," she said, her voice low and certain. Graves was a professional. He knew this was not a question. It was the next logical step. He wouldn't get his own hands dirty, Graves agreed through the phone. He'd use someone on the inside. Someone desperate, someone he could control. "Find him," Evelyn commanded. "Focus on that 12-minute window. Cross-reference every access card swipe in or out of that loading bay with the employee roster. I want to know who was breathing the air in that section while the camera was blind." "On it," Graves said, and the line went dead. Evelyn stood and walked to the vast window of her office. The city below was a glittering web of light and motion, a kingdom she commanded. But right now, her entire focus was on one man in a small apartment across town, a man who had trusted her, and another in her own company who had betrayed that trust absolutely. Damian had made a critical error. He thought he was playing a game with a warehouse worker. He had forgotten he was playing against her. For Liam, the next 2 days were a unique form of torture. He was a man built to work, to provide, to do. Being asked to sit and wait while his fate was decided in a world he couldn't see was agonizing. He kept his promise to Evelyn, spending the days with Chloe, taking her to the park, reading her stories, and helping her with her dragon drawings. But he was only half there. His mind was miles away, in a gleaming tower, replaying the confrontation with Prescott, the kindness in Evelyn's eyes, the crushing finality of Frank's words. The lie to Chloe was becoming harder to maintain. She was smart, and she could sense the tension coiling inside him. "Is your new job okay, Daddy?" she asked on Thursday afternoon as they shared a simple lunch of sandwiches. "You're very thinky again." "The job is great, sweet pea," he lied, forcing a lightness into his voice that felt like a betrayal. "Just a lot to learn." That night, long after Chloe was asleep, he couldn't rest. He paced the small living room, his mind a relentless machine, turning the events of that Tuesday over and over again, searching for a flaw, a detail, anything he might have missed. He visualized the warehouse, the rows of shelves, the faces of his co-workers. He pictured the manifest in his hands, the black letters clear and precise, ZORICH. And then, something surfaced. A small, seemingly insignificant memory. A young forklift operator named Ben, a kid who was always quiet and jumpy, who never seemed to have enough money for lunch. Just before the truck had been loaded, Ben had approached him, his eyes darting around nervously. "Hey, Liam," he'd said. "That Zurich shipment, it's a big one, huh?" Must be worth a fortune. Liam had just nodded, focused on his checklist. "It's important, yeah." "Zurich is a long way," Ben had continued, his question odd. "I bet the route from there to the distribution center is complicated." At the time, Liam had dismissed it as idle chatter. But now, in the silence of his apartment, the question echoed with a strange and specific curiosity. Why would a forklift operator care about the secondary distribution route from a destination halfway across the world? It made no sense. Unless he was confirming that the package was valuable and that its journey was complex enough for a mistake to cause maximum chaos. His heart began to pound. It was thin. It was a guess. But it was something. He grabbed his phone, his hands trembling as he found Evelyn's number. He hated bothering her, hated feeling like a helpless burden, but he had to tell her. He typed out the message. "Evie, sorry to message you so late. This might be nothing, but I remembered something about that day. A coworker, a young man named Ben, was asking strange questions about the Zurich shipment right before it left." It felt off. He hit send, his chest tight with a mixture of hope and the fear of sounding like a fool. His phone rang almost instantly. It was her. He answered, his throat dry. "Liam," she said, her voice sharp and focused. "Tell me his full name." "Ben Carter, I think," Liam said, scrambling to remember the name from the shift roster. "Stay where you are," she commanded, and the line went dead. In her office, Evelyn immediately relayed the information to Graves. "His name is Ben Carter. A forklift operator. I want everything you can find on him. Financials, communications, work history." Now it took Graves less than an hour. "You were right, Ms. Reed," he said when he called back, his voice grim. "Ben Carter has been struggling. Payday loans, credit card debt up to the limit. And 24 hours after the incident, his checking account received an anonymous wire transfer for $10,000. Evelyn closed her eyes. The final piece. Damien's pawn. "There's more," Graves said. "We recovered a deleted text on his phone from a burner. The message is simple. It just says, 'The package is on the wrong path. Your delivery is on its way.'" Evelyn's decision was instantaneous. They had the digital evidence, they had the motive, and now they had the accomplice. But a wire transfer and a vague text message could be explained away by a good lawyer. They needed a confession. She called Liam back. "We have him, Liam," she said, her voice a mixture of triumph and steel. "The man who helped Damien, his name is Ben Carter. We have proof of a payoff." Liam let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "So what happens now?" "Now we need him to talk," Evelyn said. "The police could take weeks. Damien's lawyers would bury him in paperwork. But a man facing another man, that's different." She paused. "I know his address. I need you to go talk to him, Liam. You worked with him. You're not a threat. You're a father with a daughter, a man whose life he helped ruin. He might listen to you. We need him to confirm that it was Damien who paid him off." Liam's blood ran cold. A confrontation. He wasn't a man who sought conflict. He was a man who tried to disappear. But this was different. This wasn't just about his job anymore. It was about his name. It was about his daughter. "Okay," he said, his voice steady, a newfound resolve hardening inside him. "I'll do it." Half an hour later, Liam stood on the cracked porch of a small, run-down house in a neighborhood far from the gleaming towers of the city. The paint was peeling, and one of the windows was covered with cardboard. He took a deep, steadying breath, the image of Chloe's trusting face burning in his mind. He raised his hand and knocked on the door. After a long moment, the door creaked open. Ben Carter stood there, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes wide with the panicked, hunted look of a cornered animal. He saw Liam, and whatever little color was left in his face drained away. For a long moment, they just stood there, a silent, tense tableau on the dilapidated porch. Ben's eyes darted past Liam, searching the dark street for a threat he couldn't see. Liam didn't move, didn't raise his voice. He just held the younger man's gaze, his own expression a quiet mixture of disappointment and resolve. "Can I come in, Ben?" Liam asked, his voice calm. "Or do you want to have this conversation out here for your neighbors to hear?" Ben flinched as if struck. Without another word, he stepped back, letting Liam into a small, cluttered living room that smelled of stale coffee and anxiety. He shut the door, plunging the room into semi-darkness. "I don't know what you're talking about," Ben whispered, his back pressed against the door as if to keep the world out. "I heard what happened. I'm sorry you got fired, man, but it had nothing to do with me." Liam didn't sit. He stood in the center of the small room, a calm anchor in Ben's swirling panic. "I have a daughter, Ben," he said, his voice even. "She's 7 years old. This job, it wasn't just a job. It was our future. It was the first time in a long time I thought we were going to be okay." "That's not my problem," Ben mumbled, though his eyes wouldn't meet Liam's. "It became your problem when you took the money," Liam said, his voice hardening slightly. Ben's head snapped up, his face a mask of pure terror. "Money? What money? I'm broke, man. Look at this place." $10,000, Ben, Liam stated, the number landing in the quiet room like a stone. "That's the going rate for a man's future, is it? Did Prescott tell you that my little girl would have to go without so you could pay off your credit cards?" Ben visibly trembled, his carefully constructed denial shattering. How do you know that?" "He's not going to protect you," Liam continued, pressing his advantage, his voice laced with a pity that was more effective than any threat. "A man like Damian Prescott doesn't have partners. He has tools, and when he's done with a tool, he throws it away. When this all comes out, and trust me, it is all coming out, who do you think he's going to blame? The COO with a team of lawyers, or the forklift operator with a sudden, unexplainable deposit in his bank account?" Ben slid down the door until he was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands. "He said no one would get hurt," he mumbled, his voice thick with tears. "He said it was just an insurance thing, a way to mess with the shipping company. He said you'd get transferred, not fired." "He lied to you, Ben?" Liam said softly. A choked sob escaped Ben's lips. He confessed everything in a desperate, rambling torrent of words. He told Liam how Prescott had approached him in the parking lot, how he'd known about his debts, preying on his desperation. He explained the simple instructions: use a temporary admin code to shut down the camera, swap the final shipping label on the lead crate with one Prescott had given him, and keep his mouth shut. The money had appeared in his account the next day, but so had a crushing, suffocating guilt. As Ben spoke, Liam subtly angled his phone, his thumb pressing the screen to ensure the voice recorder was capturing every word. When the confession was over, the room was filled with the sound of Ben's ragged breathing. Liam took a steadying breath. This was the hardest part. "I'm sorry, Ben," he said, holding up the phone so the younger man could see the recording in progress. "But I need this." Ben's eyes widened, a fresh wave of despair washing over him. You're taking that to the cops?" "I'm taking it to the woman he lied to," Liam corrected. "And I'm giving you a choice. You can stay here and wait for Damian's lawyers to find you, and believe me, they will. Or you can come with me right now. You can tell Evelyn Reed the truth yourself. You can be the man who made a mistake and tried to fix it, instead of the man who got caught." Ben stared at the phone, then at Liam's face, which held no malice, only a grim resolve. He slowly, shakily, got to his feet. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, I'll go with you." An hour later, Ben Carter sat trembling in a leather chair that was worth more than his car. They were in Evelyn Reed's office on the 81st floor. The view of the city lights was dizzying. The silence in the vast room was deafening. Liam stood a few feet away, a silent pillar of support. A severe-looking man in a suit, Graves, stood by the door, and a sharp-eyed woman with a briefcase sat at the edge of the large desk. Evelyn sat behind the desk, not as a friend, but as the absolute authority in the room. She listened without interruption as Ben, under the gentle but firm questioning of the lawyer, repeated his entire story. Every detail was noted, every timeline confirmed. When he was finished, Evelyn leaned forward. Her voice was cold and precise. Mr. Carter, you have put this company at significant financial and legal risk. You have knowingly conspired to commit corporate sabotage. Under normal circumstances, I would have you escorted from this building by the police. Ben flinched, shrinking into the chair. However, she continued, these are not normal circumstances. You were coerced by a superior, and you have chosen to cooperate. So here is what is going to happen. She pushed a document across the desk. You are going to sign this affidavit, a legally binding and detailed account of everything you have just told us. You will agree to testify against Mr. Prescott if and when the time comes. In return, Reed Industries will not press charges. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately, but we will not stand in the way of your future employment elsewhere. You will walk out of this building a free man. She paused, her eyes like steel. Mr. Prescott does not offer such generous terms. With a hand that shook so badly he could barely hold the pen, Ben signed the document. After Graves had escorted a visibly relieved Ben from the office, only Liam, Evelyn, and the lawyer remained. The lawyer gathered her papers. This is it, Ms. Reed. The signed affidavit, the digital forensics, the financial records. You have him. Evelyn nodded. Thank you, Catherine. That will be all for tonight. Once the lawyer had left, the vast office was silent. Evelyn rose from her desk and walked over to Liam, the hard CEO persona melting away, replaced by the woman he'd met at the park. There was a new light in her eyes as she looked at him, a deep, profound respect. You were incredible, Liam, she said softly. You faced him not with anger, but with empathy. That takes a strength most people don't have. I just thought about Chloe, he said simply, and what I'd want her to do if she ever made a mistake. She smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. The space between them felt charged, the professional lines blurring into something personal and deeply felt. She turned and looked out the window at the sprawling city. The trap is set. The evidence is irrefutable. She looked back at him, her eyes alight with a fierce, brilliant fire. It's time. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for 9 a.m. tomorrow. Damien won't know what hit him. The words hung in the air, charged with a promise of a reckoning. Damien won't know what hit him. For the first time since he'd stepped into the gleaming tower of the Reed Industries, Liam felt the intimidating aura of the building recede. He wasn't an intruder here anymore. He was a part of the fight. After the adrenaline of the last few hours, a sudden quiet exhaustion settled over them. Evelyn seemed to feel it too. The hard, steely edge to her demeanor softened, and she looked at him, her expression a mixture of relief and a weariness he recognized in himself. I think, she said, her voice a little unsteady, we've earned a moment to breathe. She walked over to a discreet, wood-paneled cabinet and opened it to reveal a small collection of crystal glasses. Will you join me for a drink, Liam? To celebrate a battle well fought. He simply nodded, sinking into one of the leather chairs that faced the window. She poured 2 glasses of something amber-colored and handed one to him, their fingers brushing for a fraction of a second. The small touch sent a current through him, a spark of warmth in the cool, vast emptiness of the office. They sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, the city lights below twinkling like a fallen constellation. What will you do now? She asked softly, breaking the quiet. When this is all over. He thought for a moment, the question opening a door to a future he hadn't dared to imagine just that morning. I'll find a job, he said. Maybe I'll have enough to start my own workshop again, a small one. Carve my birds. Be there to pick Chloe up from school every day? He looked at her, his expression sincere. The simple things. They're the ones that matter. Yes, they are, she whispered, her gaze distant. It's easy to forget that from up here. She swirled the liquid in her glass. This company, it was my father's legacy. After he passed, I poured everything I had into it, to prove I was worthy. I built it into an empire, but I think I lost a part of myself along the way. I forgot about the sparrows. She looked at him, her eyes shining with an emotion he couldn't quite name. You reminded me, Liam. He didn't know what to say. He could only look at her, at this brilliant, powerful, and deeply lonely woman who had just saved his life. He saw past the CEO, past the billionaire, to the woman who had cried over a simple piece of wood because it reminded her of her mother. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the endless city. She followed, coming to stand beside him. They were so close he could feel the warmth radiating from her, could smell the faint, clean scent of her perfume. "You didn't just save my job, Evie," he said, his voice low. "You saved me. You saw me when I felt invisible." "You saw me first," she whispered, turning to face him. The space between them crackled with unspoken feelings, with a raw, undeniable connection forged in a shared battle. The rest of the world, the board meeting, Damien, the company, it all fell away. There was only the two of them, suspended in a bubble of quiet understanding, 80 stories above the world. He saw the question in her eyes, the same one that was screaming in his own heart. And with a certainty that defied all logic, all reason, he knew what he had to do. He slowly raised his hand, his calloused fingers gently touching her cheek. She didn't pull away. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut for a fraction of a second. He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of wild passion, but of profound recognition. It was slow and gentle and filled with all the gratitude, respect, and quiet longing that had been building between them for weeks. It was a kiss that said, "I see you." When they finally broke apart, they rested their foreheads together, their breath mingling in the quiet air. It wasn't the end of a battle. It was the beginning of everything else. The next morning, the air in the executive wing of Reed Industries was electric with tension. An emergency board meeting was unheard of. The members, a collection of the city's most powerful and influential figures, filed into the boardroom with expressions of grim curiosity. Damien Prescott arrived last, striding in with an air of supreme confidence. He was dressed in a razor-sharp suit, his face a mask of composed authority. He believed the meeting was about his decisive action, his protection of the company from a costly mistake. He even gave a small, condescending nod to Frank, the warehouse supervisor, who was standing nervously by the door. He didn't notice Liam, standing quietly in an alcove down the hall, waiting. Evelyn entered the room and took her place at the head of the table. She began the meeting with a calm, almost serene composure. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming on such short notice. As you know, we had a significant logistics failure this week, resulting in a misdirected high-value shipment." "Damien," she said, turning to him, "perhaps you could walk the board through the swift action you took." Damien preened, leaning into the spotlight. He launched into a masterful speech, detailing the unfortunate but necessary termination of the employee at fault, and outlining a new series of protocols he'd developed to prevent such gross incompetence in the future. Evelyn let him finish. She let the silence in the room hang for a moment, letting his arrogance fill every corner. Then she leaned forward. "That is a very compelling story, Damien," she said, her voice dangerously soft. "A masterful piece of fiction." Damien's smile faltered. "The truth," Evelyn continued, her voice rising with cold, controlled power, "is that the error was not a result of incompetence. It was an act of deliberate corporate sabotage." A collective gasp went through the room. Evelyn pressed a button, and the large screen behind her flickered to life, displaying the digital forensics report. The manifest was hacked and altered from an external IP address, routed through a proxy server, she narrated, her voice like ice. A proxy server registered to a shell corporation that, with a little digging, we traced back to you, Damien. Damien's face went white. "This is absurd." "You're trying to frame me." "Am I?" Evelyn said, her eyes boring into him. "Let's look at the security footage from the warehouse." The screen changed, showing a time-stamped log. Odd. The camera covering the loading bay was manually disabled for 12 minutes, right before the shipment left, and the system log shows that the deactivation code was assigned to the chief operating officer. Panic began to dawn in Damien's eyes. "That's circumstantial. Anyone could have..." And then, of course, Evelyn said, cutting him off. "There is the matter of the $10,000 wire transfer to a Mr. Ben Carter, the forklift operator who was working that bay during those 12 minutes." The screen displayed the bank transaction. The final nail in the coffin was a crisp, legal document that a paralegal began distributing to every board member. "And this," Evelyn announced, her voice ringing with absolute finality, "is a signed and notarized affidavit from Mr. Carter, detailing exactly how you paid him and instructed him to help you frame an innocent man." The room erupted. Damien shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. "Lies! All of it. You will not do this to me, Evelyn." "I'm not doing anything to you, Damien," she said, standing up to face him. "You did this to yourself." She looked to the board members, who were staring at Damien with expressions of pure disgust. "I believe we have a motion for immediate termination for cause." The vote was unanimous. As security guards entered the room to escort a sputtering, defeated Damien away, his career and reputation lay in ruins around him. After the chaos subsided and the board members filed out, their faces a mixture of shock and grim relief, Evelyn walked out into the hallway. Liam was there, waiting. He had heard everything. Their eyes met across the corridor. The relief, the victory, the sheer, earth-shattering reality of what they had just accomplished passed between them in a single look. She walked straight to him, ignoring the stunned looks of her remaining executives. She took his hand, her fingers lacing with his, a simple, public declaration that changed everything. "Come on," she said, a brilliant, beautiful smile spreading across her face. "I want to show you your new office." Liam's hand in hers felt solid, real. He walked beside her, down the silent, luxurious corridor, past the stunned faces of executive assistants who scrambled to hide their shock. He wasn't the fired warehouse worker anymore. He wasn't an outsider. He was the man holding the hand of the woman who ran this entire world. She didn't lead him toward the elevators that went down to the ground floor. Instead, she took him to a wing of the building he had never seen, one filled with light and color. It was the creative division. She stopped in front of a large empty office with a frosted glass door. It was a corner office with 2 walls of floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the city. Inside, there was nothing but a large professional drafting table and an empty tool bench. Liam looked at her, confused. "I don't understand." "That junior position you applied for is beneath your skill set," she said, quoting a line from a different life, a different story. But the meaning was the same. She smiled, a teasing, brilliant light in her eyes. "My company gives out thousands of corporate gifts a year. Soulless, mass-produced paperweights and pens. I'm shutting it down." She gestured to the empty office. "This is the new home of the Reed Industries Artisanal Design Division. It needs a director. Someone with an eye for detail, a heart for the craft, and an understanding that the best things are made by hand." She looked at him, her expression open and full of a faith that took his breath away. "The job is yours, Liam, if you want it." He felt the last 4 years of struggle, of just getting by, of forgotten dreams, finally, blessedly, wash away. He looked at this powerful, incredible woman, at the future she was not just giving him, but that she believed he had earned. "I accept," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. The months that followed were a blur of joyous creation. Liam's life, once a cramped grayscale existence, exploded into color. His new office became his sanctuary, a place where he brought beauty into the world, sketching complex designs for unique, hand-carved art pieces that quickly became the most sought-after corporate gifts in the country. He hired a small team of artisans, and his division became a beacon of creativity within the corporate giant. Their relationship bloomed in the quiet moments between the chaos. They blended their worlds seamlessly. One night they would be at a glamorous charity gala. The next, they would be sitting on the floor of Liam's old apartment, eating pizza out of the box while Chloe showed Evelyn her latest dragon drawing. Evelyn, in turn, began to leave the office at a reasonable hour. She rediscovered the simple joy of a walk in the park, of reading a book with no agenda, of laughing until her sides hurt. The true magic was watching her with Chloe. Evelyn would kneel to help the little girl with a tricky drawing, her patient guidance a quiet balm. She taught Chloe how to bake her own mother's favorite cookies, filling the small apartment with the scent of cinnamon and memory. One evening, Chloe, struggling with a tangled shoelace, looked up at Evelyn and asked, "Can you show me?" Daddy makes the loops all bunny-eared and silly. Evelyn's gentle, capable hands fixed the knot, and in that small domestic moment, Liam saw not a CEO and his daughter, but a mother. 1 year after their first impossible date, Liam knew it was time. He spent a week in his workshop after hours, carving a small, intricate box from a block of cherry wood. On the lid, he carved 2 intertwined sparrows. He brought her to the workshop that Saturday, under the pretense of showing her a new design. The room was filled with the rich scent of sawdust and finishing oil, a scent he now associated with hope and rebirth. "I have something for you," he said, his heart pounding a familiar, nervous rhythm. He handed her the small wooden box. She opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a simple, elegant ring. "Evie," he began, his voice shaking slightly. "A year ago, I was a man who had lost everything. I had nothing to offer anyone but a $10 piece of wood. But you didn't see a broke, unemployed man. You saw me. You saw my heart." He took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "You and Chloe, you are my world. You are the family I never thought I'd have again. I love you, Evelyn Reed. Will you marry me?" Tears of joy welled in her eyes as she looked from the ring to the man who had shown her what it meant to find hope in the small, simple things. The man who had reminded her how to look for the sparrows. "Yes," she whispered, her voice full of all the love in her heart. "Yes, Liam." 1,000 times, yes. Their wedding was not a corporate spectacle. It was a small, intimate ceremony held in the sun-drenched conservatory of a botanical garden, surrounded by a close circle of friends. Chloe, in a yellow dress that rivaled the sun, was the flower girl, scattering white rose petals down the aisle with fierce concentration. As Liam watched Evelyn walk toward him, her smile radiant, he knew he was the richest man in the world. A few weeks later, they found themselves back at the Gilded Lantern. This time, there were 3 of them at the small table by the window. Chloe sat between them, happily coloring on a menu, while Liam and Evelyn held hands across the table. "It's funny," Liam said, his voice low, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "I was so scared that night. I thought my life was over, and instead," she prompted, her eyes soft and full of love. "And instead," he said, his gaze full of a certainty that was deep and unwavering, "it was just beginning." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small wooden sparrow. It was worn smooth from the year she had carried it with her everywhere. He placed it in the center of the table, a humble monument to their impossible story. His last $10 hadn't just bought a piece of wood. It had bought him a future. It had bought him a family. It had bought him a life bigger and brighter than he had ever dared to dream.